On the night of April 14th, 1912, the world's most advanced passenger ship was sailing through the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. Everything seemed calm. The sea was smooth, the sky was clear, and passengers aboard the magnificent RMS Titanic were enjoying music, luxury, and comfort. For many, this journey represented the future of travel, safe, modern, and powerful. But what most people don't realize is that the Titanic did not sink instantly after hitting the iceberg. It stayed afloat for nearly 2 hours and 40 minutes, time that could have saved hundreds more lives. The real tragedy was not just that the ship sank, but that critical mistakes during those 2 hours turned a disaster into a mass loss of life. At 11:40 p.m., the lookout spotted a dark shape directly ahead. The warning bell rang, and the message reached the bridge. Iceberg right ahead. Officers reacted quickly, ordering a hard turn and reversing the engines. The ship avoided a direct head-on collision, but the massive iceberg scraped along the starboard side. Too many passengers. The impact felt minor. There was no loud explosion and no violent shaking. In fact, many people barely noticed that anything had happened below the surface. However, the situation was far more serious. The iceberg had torn open the hull across multiple compartments, and water began rushing in faster than the pumps could remove it. Within minutes, the ship's designer and senior officers inspected the damage and reached a devastating conclusion. The ship would not survive. Too many compartments were flooding, and the vessel had less than 3 hours before it would sink. This moment was critical. The officers understood the danger, but most passengers did not. Instead of immediate urgency, the evacuation began slowly and cautiously because the crew feared causing panic. At first, lifeboats were prepared almost as a precaution rather than an emergency measure. Passengers were asked to put on life jackets and come to the deck, but many were reassured that the ship was safe. The atmosphere did not match the seriousness of the situation. The lights remained on, the band continued playing, and the ship still appeared stable. It was difficult for people to believe that such a massive and modern vessel could actually sink. This false sense of security caused dangerous delays. Another major problem soon became clear. There were not enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Although the ship carried more lifeboats than required by outdated regulations, there was space for only about half the passengers and crew. Even worse, many of the early lifeboats were launched half-empty. Some boats designed to carry 60 people left, with only 20 or 30. Crew members were uncertain about the ship's condition, and passengers were hesitant to step into small boats hanging high above the dark, freezing ocean. Many believed they would return to the ship later, while others refused to leave what still felt like safety. The evacuation also suffered from poor organization. Different officers interpreted the order women and children first in different ways. On one side of the ship, men were allowed into lifeboats if no women were nearby, while on the other side, men were strictly prevented from boarding. This inconsistency created confusion and slowed the process. Meanwhile, the bow was gradually sinking deeper into the water, and the tilt of the ship became more noticeable with each passing minute. Water continued flooding the lower decks as engineers and crew worked desperately to keep systems running and buy more time, knowing that every extra minute meant more lives could be saved. Perhaps the most tragic part of the story is that help was closer than many realized. The SS Californian was only about 10 to 20 miles away. Earlier that night, it had stopped because it was surrounded by ice. Its crew later reported seeing rockets in the distance, but its wireless operator had shut down for the night and did not receive the distress calls. Instead, Titanic's emergency signals were picked up by the RMS Carpathia, which was more than 50 miles away. The Carpathia immediately changed course and raced through dangerous ice fields at full speed. But even at maximum effort, it would take hours to arrive. Back on the Titanic, the situation became increasingly desperate. As the angle of the ship grew steeper, launching lifeboats became more dangerous. Passengers slowly began to realize the seriousness of the situation, and panic started to replace disbelief. But by then, valuable time had already been lost. If the evacuation had begun immediately with full urgency, if every lifeboat had been filled to capacity from the beginning, and if passengers had been clearly told the truth earlier, hundreds more lives might have been saved. By around 2 a.m., the bow was deep underwater, and the stern was rising high into the air. The ship's structure was under enormous stress. Lights began to fail, the deck tilted sharply, and it became difficult to stand. The remaining passengers moved toward the stern, hoping to stay above the water as long as possible. At 2:20 a.m., just 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision, the Titanic broke apart and disappeared beneath the freezing Atlantic. More than 1,500 people lost their lives. When the Carpathia finally arrived, it found lifeboats scattered across the dark ocean and hundreds of survivors suffering from shock and cold. The scale of the tragedy stunned the world. In the days that followed, attention focused on the iceberg and the dramatic final moments. But investigations later revealed a deeper truth. The disaster was not only about the collision, it was about what happened afterward. The Titanic did not sink immediately. It gave time, precious time, that was not used effectively. This is why many historians believe the real tragedy was the lost opportunity during those 2 hours. The slow response, half-empty lifeboats, lack of urgency, and failure to clearly communicate the danger all contributed to the high number of casualties. The sinking of the Titanic changed maritime safety forever. New international laws required ships to carry enough lifeboats for everyone. Continuous radio watch became mandatory, and proper emergency planning and drills became standard practice. Today, the story of Titanic remains powerful, not only because of the scale of the disaster, but because of the lessons it teaches. The ship did not fail instantly, and the ocean did not claim it without warning. There was time to act, time to organize, and time to save more people. But hesitation, disbelief, and poor coordination turned those minutes into lost chances. The Titanic was a symbol of confidence in technology and progress. People believed it was too advanced to fail, and that belief slowed their response when danger became real. The disaster reminds us that even the strongest systems require preparation for the worst. On that cold April night, the difference between survival and tragedy was not measured only by the iceberg or the freezing water. It was measured in decisions, communication, and urgency. The Titanic did not sink instantly. It sank slowly, and in those 2 hours and 40 minutes, history showed how valuable time can be, and how costly it becomes when that time is lost.